Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good evening and welcome to the most comprehensive Hindu analysis on YouTube. Let's start our discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 6 important articles for a detailed analysis. There are a couple of articles and columns which are repetitive, so I'm excluding them as we have discussed those topics in our previous sessions. But these 6 topics can be extremely important, and we will dive deep into these articles, go beyond the article, cover all the background and the required data and information so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. But before we start, I have a very important announcement. On 11th April, we are conducting Unacademy Civil Services Championship Test, which is going to be India's biggest scholarship test. So you will get a chance to attempt 50 questions and stand a chance to win attractive scholarship and rewards. But that is not the best part. The best part is that the top 32 performers, they will be selected for one of India's biggest national level quiz, which will be conducted by Unacademy. The top 32 performers will be divided into 16 teams and you will be flown to the venue. Your entire travel, accommodation, food, and the entire cost would be borne by Unacademy for this particular quiz. And the top team, which is going to win the quiz, will stand a chance to win 5 lakh rupees in cash prize. Then the runner up will get up to 2 lakh rupees in cash prize, and team 3 and 4 getting up to 50,000 rupees each. So a total cash reward of 8 lakh rupees awaits the top performers who will get qualified for this quiz competition. Apart from that, several other 100 toppers will receive gift vouchers from Amazon. So those interested, please click on the link provided in the description below. Register for the test immediately. The test will be held in 2 phases, one at 11 a.m. or you can decide to take it up in the evening at 5 p.m. It's your choice. So you have 2 slots. You just have to appear once. So with this, let's get started with the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper, and let's look at the first topic. On page 1 and 17, we have a set of articles related to the heightened tensions between US and Iran that we saw yesterday, the rapid escalation that happened in the tensions with regard to the ongoing Iran war. The world waited with bated breath as Donald Trump made very controversial statements threatening Iran, threatening to wipe out the Iranian civilization itself. In fact, if you remember, we have discussed how Donald Trump had given a deadline to Iran in order to agree to all the demands presented by the United States. The US had presented the so called 15-point peace plan, which had been shared with Iran via Pakistani intermediaries, as Pakistan has been acting as a mediator between US and Iran. Now, this deadline had been repeatedly extended by Donald Trump over the last couple of weeks. The deadline expired on April 6th, and Trump had set a fresh deadline, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 7th of April, which was essentially today early morning hours in India, around 5:30 a.m. on April 8th in India. So, as this deadline approached, Trump had sworn to wipe out Iran, targeting its critical infrastructure, to vaporize its power plants and bridges. These blatant threats were issued repeatedly, with very controversial posts being made, with even some posts containing expletive words aimed at abusing the Iranian regime and the Iranian leadership. But what really set off alarm bells across the world yesterday was this controversial social media post, where Trump said that an entire civilization is going to die and it's not going to be possible to build it back. So this created a lot of alarm because parallelly, US Vice President JD Vance, he said in Europe when he was meeting with the Hungarian leader that US has still not deployed all the tools in its toolkit. So many interpreted this as a reference to the N word, the nuclear weapons. And there was a lot of rumor and speculation floating around yesterday that would US consider escalating the war, probably using a nuclear weapon against Iran. So this had created tremendous panic and alarm across the world. This is the social media post I was referring to. Now, of course, we are living in unprecedented times. We are living in a time of great uncertainty where every known international rules based order is being disbanded, the rule books are being thrown out, and leaders like Donald Trump are blatantly dismantling it and profiting and benefiting from it. So, last night, the whole world waited to see as to what would happen as Iran appeared uh, not to budge, not to agree to these demands. But in a dramatic last minute decision, just with minutes to the deadline, it was reported that US has accepted some of Iran's proposals. And with the mediation of Pakistan, they have achieved a huge breakthrough. A temporary ceasefire has been achieved. But in the run up to this, Iran was preparing for a full fledged assault by US and Israel. In fact, yesterday, even many hours before the deadline expired, the strategic Karg Island was bombarded by both US and Israel, which is the energy backbone of Iran's economy. 90% of Iran's oil exports is essentially loaded through the jetties located at Karg Island onto super tankers. So US and Israel carried out fresh strikes at Karg Island, and since US was looking to take aim at critical infrastructure in Iran, the Iranian government was urging its population to come out and form human chains around these projects to protect them, to act as a human shield. According to reports, Israel had even targeted railway infrastructure, targeting railway lines, trains, while US was more focused on targeting the Karg Island. So since there was expectations that US would hit the power plants, energy infrastructure and the bridges, Iranian government carried out a huge campaign, a SMS based campaign, claiming that it mobilized 14 million people. Especially the youth were urged to step out, and the Iranian president, Pezeshkian himself, said that he would volunteer without hesitation to sacrifice himself for his country. So we did see a big mobilization happening in Iran yesterday where civilians came out openly trying to form human chains around these critical projects to prevent US from taking aim at critical infrastructure. Any such strike would be deemed as a war crime. It is blatantly illegal because under international law, targeting civilians and targeting critical infrastructure is prohibited. So US was risking committing serious war crimes in cahoots with Israel. And that is why there was a lot of global panic and alarm, especially after Trump tweeted that the whole civilization would be wiped out if the deadline is not met. Now, thankfully, through a last minute deal, a temporary ceasefire has been worked out. So let's take a quick look at what are the terms and provisions of this temporary ceasefire. This ceasefire was mediated primarily by Pakistan with other key regional powers. And as per the temporary truce that they have called, there would be a cessation of hostilities. US and as well as Israel have agreed to stop all military strikes on Iran, and they expect Iran to stop the hostilities as well. This ceasefire is expected to last 2 weeks, but it is based on one condition. That is, Iran should reopen Hormuz Strait without conditions. Iran, which has been able to leverage the Hormuz Strait and crippled global oil supplies and gas supplies, has levied a huge cost on the global economy in order to pressurize US and Israel to back off from this conflict. So this strategy has worked to some extent, and now Iran is expected to lift the blockade, allow the ships to pass through immediately if the ceasefire has to be respected by US and Israel. So this is a non-negotiable condition. So Israel, on the other hand, which until yesterday continued carrying out strikes on Iran, has also committed that it will halt the attacks against Iran, respect the temporary ceasefire. But however, Israeli strikes on Lebanon, they are going to continue. In fact, according to another article in today's newspaper, in southern Lebanon, Israeli defense forces have already occupied significant territory. They've made deep inroads into Lebanese territory as Israel fights against Hezbollah, that is based out of Lebanon, which is an Iranian proxy. So up to 5 to 9 kilometers from the UN recognized international border of Israel and Lebanon, the IDF forces have invaded into the country and occupied large swaths of territory in southern Lebanon to prevent this area from being used by Hezbollah fighters to launch rockets and missiles and drones at northern Israel. So the war between Israel and Lebanon continues. But for now, the Israel Iran war has hit a temporary ceasefire. But the big question is, will the ceasefire really hold? Most experts believe that it's a very fragile peace that has been worked out because Iran is unlikely to agree to all the demands of Donald Trump, US, and Israel. US and Israel are also unlikely to accept the proposal made by Iran. So it's all very uncertain as of now, but it definitely gives a temporary breather for the region, for the global markets, for global energy supplies as well. That's why immediately after the ceasefire was announced, you see oil prices plunging after several days. You see stock markets flying across the world. So Donald Trump appeared to thank Pakistan and its leaders for their critical role in mediating the ceasefire, particularly Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif and Field Marshal Asim Munir. This again highlights the role of Pakistan, how it is trying to use this opportunity to not only resolve a pressing crisis in its neighborhood, but also to enhance its global profile by trying to act as a reliable intermediary between Iran and the United States. So later today, I will do a separate video on this. If you guys want it, please let me know in the comments, and I would definitely take up a separate video on the role of Pakistan as a mediator. There are some interesting aspects and points to discuss as to whether Pakistan can be a reliable mediator. And what does Pakistan gain from this? What does it mean for India? Should India be worried that Pakistan's global profile is enhancing? And will Pakistan simply turn out to be a useful idiot, which is being just used and exploited by Donald Trump to achieve his agenda? That is something we can debate and discuss in a separate video. So if you want it, please let me know in the comments. Later today, we will definitely bring out a separate video on this. Now, this mediation was not facilitated just by Pakistan alone. Pakistan was the most conducive actor to come in between US and Iran, but there were other regional powers as well, especially Turkey, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia, the key Arab powers. Their foreign ministers have also played a very critical role. And from the Iranian side, it was Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, who was leading the talks, with the American side mainly represented by Steve Witkoff, the special envoy of President Trump. It has also been reported that the ceasefire was possible because of the Ayatollah's final approval. Murtaba Khamenei, who is grievously injured and hiding in a secret location, apparently gave a final go ahead on this ceasefire proposal, without which the ceasefire may not have been possible. So Donald Trump is now hoping that Iran and US will use the 2 week period to work out a formal and final ceasefire to bring the war to an end. But until then, Iran will have to remain committed to its guarantees. That is, Hormuz Strait will have to remain open. Iran should stop attacking the Gulf states. Israel should also uphold its commitments. Because we have seen in the past, Israel in particular is known to breach any such commitments made. It is known to violate the guarantees that were given and carry out repeated ceasefire violations. For example, look at the war in Lebanon. A couple of years ago, a ceasefire had been worked out between Israel and Hezbollah. But as the Iran war broke out, Hezbollah came to Iran's support. Israel has broken the ceasefire as Hezbollah launched rocket attacks and missile and drone attacks, thus resuming the conflict in Lebanon. So, many experts believe that this halt would only give a temporary relief. So, we need to wait and watch as to what happens in the next 14 days. So, over the next 14 days, Pakistan will get to play a much, much bigger role. Now that a temporary ceasefire has been achieved, the goal is on pushing Iran's 10-point plan to achieve a compromise with the 15-point peace plan that Donald Trump has proposed. So let's take a quick look at what US and Iran are expecting through this peace process. Iran has submitted a 10-point plan, which Pakistan has forwarded to the American side. And few days ago, US has already forwarded the 15-point peace plan, which has been sent across to the Iranian leadership. So Iran is expecting a commitment from both US and Israel with regard to non-aggression, meaning they want not just a complete stop of the current war, they want future guarantees as well that US and Israel will never violate Iran's sovereignty. Iran expects a recognition of its control over Strait of Hormuz. It wants the global powers to accept its nuclear enrichment program and lift all the primary, secondary sanctions imposed on it through UN resolutions, through the United States, all the sanctions to be lifted. Then Iran wants a termination of all the UNSC resolutions, which pave the way for the sanctions to take effect, and ensure that the IAEA resolutions are also terminated, which brings Iran's nuclear program under international scrutiny. Iran wants reparations to be paid, a compensation for the damages caused by the war by US and Israel. It is also proposing a toll to be levied at Hormuz Strait, which Iran can utilize for reconstruction and rebuilding the country. Then Iran is demanding a complete withdrawal of US forces from across the West Asia Gulf region and a complete halt to all the conflicts that are raging across the region, where Israel has targeted all the Iranian proxies, including the Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, and Hamas in Gaza. So, a quick reading of these 10 demands by Iran makes it very clear that none of the demands will be accepted by US or Israel. These are maximalist demands and position being taken by Iran, and that is what makes the ceasefire very fragile and tentative. Now, when you look at the American demands under the 15-point peace plan pushed by Donald Trump, even here the demands are maximalist in nature. See, it appears that both sides have forgotten basic lessons in conflict resolution and conflict management. Lesson number one is that you need to have a viable leadership to negotiate. And US Israel wiped out the Iranian leadership. So, whatever you negotiate after that may not have the right legitimacy and the right support. And you always need to keep a buffer where you can take a back step and climb down the escalation ladder without basically getting into a vicious cycle where escalating on both sides would be the only viable option. That's what we call as the security dilemma. It's a concept in political science. In security dilemma, when two adversaries are involved, one believes that if I don't do anything, the other side will arm themselves, they might attack me, and the country will start arming itself, entering into a very deadly arms race. And the exact opposite happens on the other side. The other country will also think that the other state is a threat. They're posing an immediate threat and they start arming themselves, resulting in an escalatory situation where you can't step down, where you can't de escalate. Any de escalation would be seen as a setback. And that's exactly what US Israel have locked themselves into. Same with Iran. Iran has locked itself into a situation where it can't backstep, it can't be seen to be stepping down or surrendering. So US is proposing a 30 to 45-day ceasefire, which is being pushed by Pakistan. But US demands a complete dismantling of Iran's nuclear program, a complete shutdown of Iran's nuclear enrichment, and a permanent commitment that Iran would never ever develop nuclear weapons. US is also expecting that Iran should hand over its existing stockpile of enriched uranium to the IAEA and allow for IAEA inspections to continue. The US also expects Iran to curb its missile program, curb the range and the number of ballistic missiles and drones it has developed. US is expecting Iran to stop supporting the regional proxies, to stop sponsoring Hezbollah, Houthis, and the Hamas, and promise that Iran would not attack energy facilities and civilian and critical infrastructure across the Gulf region, and reopen the Hormuz Strait without further conditions. So, in return, if Iran accepts them, the US has promised that sanctions will be lifted, the UN resolutions related to it will also be terminated, and US might even help Iran in civilian nuclear energy, particularly at the Bushehr civilian nuclear power plant. But as you can see, the demands from US, which are backed by Israel essentially, are also maximalist in nature, Iran would never agree to this, right? Even if they agree to end their nuclear program and enrichment, hand over their stockpile, the other demands is something Iran would never agree to, because this represents a big setback for Iran, a big step down, where Iran might be seen as surrendering. So that's why they're locked in a security dilemma, a vicious cycle where they only have to escalate from here on. They can't de escalate. So this makes the role of the mediator even more difficult. So Pakistan has gotten itself into a slightly difficult situation. As of now, it might be seen as a victory for Pakistan as it enhances its global profile. But working between these countries and trying to work out a viable solution is going to be a different challenge altogether. Now, based on what we have analyzed regarding the US Iran ceasefire and the recent developments, please take up this practice question. Now, let's look at a related topic. Today, the Hindu has published a very beautiful, insightful article on the topic of international mediation, which is a basic step in conflict resolution in the field of political science and international relations. This can be a great essay topic because in today's chaotic world, which is filled with wars and conflicts and disputes, the role of international mediation has become all the more important. So you need to understand international mediation from a theoretical point of view as a concept and how it applies in the world of international disputes. So we can take a historical look. We can look at how various disputes have been resolved through international mediation. We can look at the international legal framework, right, that exists under the UN and other conventions that provides for international mediation efforts to resolve standing disputes and conflicts. In the context of the Iran war and the role of Pakistan as a mediator, I believe this article can be very, very important. You can even expect a question under GS paper 2 related to IR, polity, etc. Or a question related to ethics in paper 4 related to mediation, arbitration, or an entire essay topic, and definitely an optional topic for PSIR. So let's understand the importance of mediation in conflict resolution. See, according to political science experts, the theorists in particular, they strongly believe that conflict resolution is a key and integral part of today's geopolitics and international relations. The mediator plays a pivotal role in bringing two hostile parties together to ensure that they agree upon a compromise without appearing to be on the losing side, where both can claim victory. That's why yesterday, after the ceasefire was announced, in Iran, celebrations have broken out, where Iran is claiming victory. US, on the other hand, is also trying to claim its own sense of victory. So, a well mediated effort with a neutral and a good mediator can bring about such a compromise where both sides can claim some form of victory and step back. Because if it is a humiliating surrender, nobody will agree for the compromise and the conflict will drag. So, one of the basic lessons in conflict resolution is to create such a ground where both sides can claim victory and step back and then ensure that the conflict is at least temporarily brought to a halt. So, when you look at conflict management and resolution, there's an entire set of theory and political thought behind it. In fact, there's a rich history behind it as well. If you look at great Indian Hindu epics like Mahabharata, Lord Krishna was known as a counselor, mediator, jurist, a diplomat. I'm sure you must be aware of his role in mediating between the Pandavas and the Kauravas, right? There are many such examples in Indian mythology, philosophy, in Indian literature, in Indian history as well. If you look at Chanakya's Arthashastra, Kautilya talks about the importance of mediation to achieve quick resolution to a conflict, to strike out a viable compromise. So, when you look at the world of mediation, there's a rich history behind it. In fact, if you read about the Sumerian dynasty and the kings, the Sumerian king Mesilim, 4,000 years ago, successfully mediated between the city states of Lagash and Umma, which were at conflict. So there are many such historical references where mediation has always worked to bring about a viable compromise to end conflicts. So in this context, there is one theory, a theoretical model that you need to learn, It's called the contingency model of mediation. The contingency model of mediation, or CMM, it was developed by a well-known writer and thinker, Jacob Berkowitz. According to Jacob Berkowitz, under the contingency model of mediation, there are multiple factors that are involved, which determines the success of a mediation effort. So this flowchart or diagram depicts those multiple factors. One is the context of the dispute or the war. For what reason is this war taking place? What is the root cause, the core issue of this particular dispute or conflict? The context of that, the background, plays a determining role in achieving a successful mediation. Then the nature of the parties that are involved. Let's say you take the Kashmir issue between India and Pakistan, right? The nature of strategic thinking in India and Pakistan, their objectives, the very nature of the dispute and its historical context plays a key role whether a mediation can work or not. Then, more importantly, in a mediation effort, the nature of the mediator, the qualification of the mediator, the credibility of the mediator becomes very critical. Because, see, a mediator should be seen as someone who is neutral, someone who is capable to use leverage on both parties to convince them to agree to a concession. The mediator should be a credible actor, someone who is respected in international relations as a trusted partner, as a reliable, trustworthy partner. So, all these factors are very important and relevant. It also depends on the individual personal attributes of the lead mediators and negotiators. Are they good communicators? Do they have good communication skills? Do they have patience? Can they step back, look at both perspectives from both sides, and try to work out a viable plan to bring any conflict or dispute to an end, to a mediated settlement? These abilities of a mediator are critical under the contingency model of mediation propounded by Jacob Berkowitz. Now, based on this, if you apply this to, let's say, Pakistan, right, you need to ask yourself, can Pakistan be seen as a credible, reliable, trusted partner? Does Pakistan have any history of acting as a mediator? What does Pakistan gain from it? How come Iran accepted Pakistan as a mediator? How come US also accepted Pakistan as a mediator? Right? These are the basic questions you need to answer to figure out why Pakistan has been able to place itself in this position. That's why I told you, if you want a separate discussion on the topic, please let me know in the comments. Later today, I'll try to bring out a small video on Pakistan as a mediator and what does it mean for India. Now let's talk about the legal position of mediation. Under international law, is there any framework, a legal institutional framework for mediation efforts? See, before the world wars, the Hague Conventions of 1899 and 1907, they led to the adoption of the Pacific Settlement of International Disputes. Now, please make a note of this, very, very important for your prelims exam. The Pacific Settlement of International Disputes, which predates your world wars, for the first time, it created a framework for mediation and dispute settlement. It was a byproduct of the Hague Conventions of 1899 and 1907. And it was this settlement through the Hague Conventions that led to the establishment of the Permanent Court of Arbitration, the PCA, which is an arbitration body headquartered at The Hague in Netherlands. So the PCA was born out of this process. The Hague Conventions on International Conflict and Dispute Settlement of 1899 and 1907 led to the establishment of the Pacific Settlement of International Disputes, which in turn led to the establishment of the Permanent Court of Arbitration. So for the first time, peaceful resolution of conflicts was recognized as part of international mechanisms, where neutral mediators could basically provide their good offices to be used by countries at conflict to try and work out a arbitration, to try and work out a mediated settlement to end the conflict. But however, it was not codified into international law. It was not made as part of customary international law. It was not seen as binding in nature, but it did create a platform through which international disputes could be mediated and resolved. This became your legal framework for the League of Nations that was set up after World War I. It later would become the legal framework for the United Nations that was set up after World War II to replace the League of Nations. So once the UN was set up in 1945, the UN Charter and some of the principles and provisions under it provides the current framework for international mediation and dispute settlement. The Hague Conventions, they still remain relevant. The PCA is still an arbitration body where countries can resolve disputes without a conflict. Along with that, we have the UN framework, which was created through the UN Charter. Chapter number 6 of the UN Charter specifically promotes peaceful settlement of disputes. Because see, the UN was established in 1945 after Second World War for one primary purpose, which was to end international disputes and conflicts, to strive towards peaceful settlement through negotiations and talks instead of wars and conflicts. So this is one of the primary objectives of the UN. Article 33 of the UN Charter, it explicitly calls on UN member states to resolve disputes only through peaceful methods, such as negotiations, mediation, arbitration, judicial settlements, etc. That's why judicial bodies like ICJ were set up through the UN Charter under the UN to resolve any such interstate disputes. Then we also have the General Assembly Resolution 65 bar 283 adopted by UN General Assembly in 2011 that highlights the importance of conflict prevention and resolution and calls for enhanced mediation capacity of the UN and the global community. This was further codified. The guidelines were brought out for this resolution through the UN Guidance for Effective Mediation in 2012. So there is a UN outlined framework that exists for mediation that's based on this General Assembly resolution of 2011. It outlines the key principles and the preparedness and the consent which is required of the parties and the impartiality of the mediator that is required. Those guidelines are highlighted under this UN guidance for effective mediation. So, UN has played a big role in mediating conflicts over the last 7 decades. It has even deployed UN peacekeeping forces, run several UN peacekeeping missions, more than 70 peacekeeping missions across the world to fulfill this mandate. It has acted as a mediator and negotiator to work out ceasefires, to ensure that conflicts and wars are brought to a negotiated settlement. So the UN has a history of playing this role, though its effectiveness is under question, though it is largely misused by the P5 countries, which hold the veto power within the UN Security Council. Despite that, the UN has been one of the key platforms for such mediation efforts, along with Permanent Court of Arbitration and the International Court of Justice. So now when you look at examples of successful mediation in the past, we have some individuals who have contributed. We have some countries and institutions that have contributed. Take, for example, the role of the former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan in mediation in Kenya. Or look at the Camp David Accords of 1979, when the US mediated between Israel and Egypt to end the hostility between them, that led Egypt to make peace with Israel, to recognize Israel, set up ties with Israel, in return for the Sinai Peninsula that Israel had occupied during the Six-Day Arab War. Then look at the role of US-led negotiators in the Dayton Agreement of 1995 with regard to the Bosnian conflict in the Balkan region, in the southeast region of Europe, as conflict raged in Bosnia, Serbia, and Kosovo. This deal played a very big role to bring the conflict to a resolution. Or look at how Irish insurgency was resolved through the Good Friday Agreement between the Irish insurgents and the nationalist Irish, and as well as the United Kingdom. It was mediated by a former US Senator, George Mitchell. So it's not just countries, governments which can play a role, or it's not just UN or PCA or ICJ which can play such roles. It is even individual leaders, well known or respected individuals can also lead such efforts. Of course, through ICJ, it is a judicial resolution that can be worked out. It will become a adjudication, right? It won't be a mediation or arbitration, but through PCA, through UN and other states and individuals, conflicts can be resolved through mediation and arbitration. We also have the Oslo Accords of 1990s, where Norway acted as a facilitator, a neutral mediator between Israel and the Palestinian Liberation Organization that led to the historic Oslo Accords. So there are many such examples that you can think of. So now the role of Pakistan, particularly Asim Munir and Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, in working out the talks between US and Iran, it is in the limelight. So let's do a separate video on this all important topic. Please let me know if you want such a video in the comments later in the day. As I said, we will plan a separate video for this to discuss how Pakistan has been able to position itself, why Iran accepted Pakistan as a mediator, why US is comfortable in dealing with Asim Munir, what does it mean for Pakistan's profile, what does it mean for India's interests and concerns in the region. That is something we'll discuss in detail in a separate video. Now, please take up this mains question for your answer writing practice. Now, moving on, we have a very important editorial related to polity, internal security, and ethics. It is focused on the topic of custodial torture and custodial deaths that occur in India. It's a topic that raises questions about fundamental rights and human rights. It's a topic that raises questions about police reforms that are needed in our country. It's a topic that raises key ethical questions in governance. So let's explore the topic of custodial torture and deaths. So first, let's understand why this topic is in news. See, the topic is in news because recently the Madurai bench of the Tamil Nadu High Court has delivered a landmark verdict in the Sattankulam case. This is a horrific case that goes back to the COVID period, 2020. So, a father and son were brutally tortured in police custody and brutally killed by policemen. This case generated a lot of nationwide interest. A lot of protests were seen against this incident, this horrific killing of innocent civilians at the hands of the police. So finally, the case has reached a logical conclusion, at least for now. And the Madurai court has awarded the death penalty for all the 9 accused policemen, holding them guilty for custodial deaths of these 2 innocent people. And with this verdict, it has brought back the focus on custodial torture and custodial killings. Now, to understand the relevance of this case, why is it so important? Why is it even relevant for our exams? You need to understand what happened in 2020. So, this case can even be very important for public administration in your optional subject. If you're talking about police reforms, sensitized police, and empathetic governance, and delivering justice to the victims of state violence. For such topics, this can be a great example. See, in Tamil Nadu, when the COVID pandemic had broken out, the lockdown restrictions were in place. It was in the month of June 2020. A trader, Mr. P. Jairaj, and his son, J. Benix, they were picked up by the local police, the Sattankulam police station. That's why the case is called the Sattankulam case, named after the police station where the custodial killings happened. So the Sattankulam police, they picked up the father and son by accusing that they were violating the lockdown restrictions. The son ran a mobile service center and shop where apparently the father was found by the police in violation of the lockdown restrictions. For this violation, apparently the father was picked up, taken to the police custody, and apparently the father was tortured, beaten up. And the son, upon hearing about the father's arrest, rushed to the Sattankulam police station, demanding the release of his father, which apparently led to an altercation between Benix and the police. So they took the son also into custody, and according to reports, according to the investigation that has followed, they were brutally beaten and tortured over the next few hours. In fact, the police even managed to obtain a medically fit certificate in collusion with a corrupt government doctor. And they secured a judicial custody as well for them and lodged them in a different jail, following which they passed away because of the complications they developed because of severe bleeding and internal hemorrhage caused by severe torture and beating that had happened in custody. So this case, it triggered huge uproar across the nation from human rights activists, civil society organizations, and that's when it attracted national limelight. So finally, the case was handed over to CBI. Since the state police would not be able to ensure the integrity, the transparency of the investigation, there was a fear that the case could be rushed up and evidence could be buried. There could be a possibility of a bias by the state police. So the state government, with the MHA, handed over the case to the CBI, and the CBI carried out the further investigation. And the conviction was achieved because of the technical evidence found, the blood samples and eyewitness accounts, and especially the eyewitness account of one lady police constable who testified against her counterparts, those who were involved in the torture and killing of these two innocents. So finally, the case has reached a logical conclusion. Of course, the case will go on appeal as death penalty has been delivered to all the 9 policemen. But this itself um, highlights the need for securing justice to the victims of custodial torture and custodial violence. This will set an example for policemen. This could probably create a path for more sensitized police forces in the country. So, when you look at the topic of custodial deaths and custodial torture, as I said, it's something which is very critical to ensure that you are raising a sensitized police force. See, I've taken this document from one of the training documents used in SVP NPA, the Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel National Police Academy in Hyderabad uses a lot of training material to train IPS probationers. And this is taken from one of those training documents. It specifically highlights the concerns related to custodial deaths, custodial torture. It sets the legal, constitutional, and international context and points out what is the role of the police force. The police force, should it be meant for brutally enforcing rules? Can they do anything in the name of enforcing rules? See, it is understandable that if the father and son in the Sattankulam case were violating lockdown orders, yes, the law had to take its course, but that should not lead to the abuse of the power and the authority. This is generally what is seen at the lower levels of the police establishment. And especially with regard to state police, it has been the norm. Tamil Nadu is quite notorious for custodial torture and killings. Same with Uttar Pradesh. It's notorious for fake encounters. To some extent, Gujarat and other states as well. There are many such incidents which have happened in the past where custodial torture and killings are becoming quite common, and they are often even looked away and ignored upon without securing justice for the victims. So, when the law protectors, when the law enforcers are breaking the law, taking matters into their own hands, that amounts to the biggest breach of the constitutional obligation of protecting the basic rights of our citizens. This document used by SVP NPA refers to the question that Jerome Skolnick had raised. For what purpose do police exist? That's a question that every police officer should ask themselves. That's a question the society should be asking itself. Why should the police force exist? Is it just to maintain law and order by any means and methods? Or is it to ensure that they work with the society, they enable the society, they act as sensitized, empathetic officers, assisting the society to maintain peace, stability, and public order? So that will determine the difference between a brutal police force. They might be efficient, but brutality, torture cannot be justified in any context, right? You might be dealing with a terrorist who has openly killed a lot of civilians, but still, it doesn't give the right to the investigator to torture. Employing torture is unacceptable in a democratic state. And empirical studies have shown that torture is ineffective. It's it's a very flawed way of getting evidence. See, police might obtain a confession, right? But confession today doesn't have the required legal validity for getting a prosecution. That's mainly because evidence obtained to torture is not only unreliable, right? Because when you're subjected to humiliation, severe pain, obviously you will be forced to say anything just to make the pain go away, right? You might even confess to a crime you have not even done. But it's not just about the unreliability of the evidence, it's also about violation of human rights. It's about holding the police force accountable, the law enforcement agencies accountable, so that such cases do not occur in policing. That's why even at SVP and PA, the motto through which IPS probationers are trained is to raise a sensitized police force, an empathetic police force that works with the people, with the society to maintain law and order. They should not be blind enforcers of the law. They can't resort to any means and methods and justify that by saying that we are just upholding the law. So, studies have shown that custodial torture is not only ineffective, not only does it get unreliable evidence, it is often seen that the worst sufferers of custodial violence happen to be the marginalized classes. According to data from National Crime Records Bureau and the Bureau of Police Research and Development, the BPRD, the data shows that wherever cases of custodial torture or killings were reported, it's often against marginalized sections, people from SC, ST community, those from backward classes, tribals, women, the poor people. They are often targeted by the police. The rogue police officers, right, who think they can do anything they want. It's often seen that they abuse the law and exercise this atrocity only against the poor and the marginalized. Because see, the police don't have the guts to touch someone who's rich and influential, right? They give them VIP treatment, they let them get away as well with horrific crimes, but they unleash their frustration, their anger against poor, marginalized people. That's what the Law Commission had also observed. That data shows that there is a disproportionate impact on poor, marginalized communities. If you've seen movies like Jai Bhim, that shows the extent of torture that was unleashed against the Dalits and the SCs in Tamil Nadu, right? And this has been the case across India, especially SCs, STs, poor and marginalized sections. They are at the receiving end of the brutality of the police forces. So when you look at the constitutionality and legality of this, the Indian Constitution accords several basic fundamental rights. Article 14 guarantees right to equality before law. So any form of torture, coercion by the police goes against Article 14. Article 21 guarantees the right to life and dignity, which includes freedom from torture, coercion, threats, any degrading form of treatment or punishment by the police when you're in custody. Then, more importantly, Article 20. 20 Clause 1 prevents retrospective punishment. Let's say a crime was committed and later a law is brought in defining it, a punishment for it. Retrospective application is not allowed. And the right against self incrimination, the right against double jeopardy, the right against retrospective punishment, and the right against self incrimination. These are critical constitutional rights. You can't be forced to give a confession against yourself. You can't be coerced or threatened through pressure, through torture to give a confession against yourself, which can lead to self incrimination. Such evidence is not acceptable in a court of law. There are legal provisions as well that go against torture. If you look at the criminal laws, the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita under section 120, it treats custodial torture as a criminal offense. If police, law enforcement cause any intentional hurt, harm, or any form of violation of one's dignity, or any form of physical, mental abuse and torture, it is seen as a criminally punishable offense. And such rogue police officers, they need to be made an example out of. Ensure that they get the strictest of punishment, as seen in the Sattankulam verdict, so that that becomes an example to set the force right and to develop a sensitized police force. You need strict penal provisions, quick, effective prosecution to hold such rogue and guilty officers accountable. The Bharatiya Nagarik Suraksha Sanhita, section 35, it mandates that arrest detention must be based on valid reasons that are documented. It prevents arbitrary arrest and detentions. It paves the way for a clear process where magisterial, judicial warrants and approvals are required to proceed with one's custody. Then Bharatiya Sakshya Adhiniyam that replaced the Indian Evidence Act, Section 22. It invalidates any confession obtained through inducement, threat, coercion, and pressure. Confession is not accepted. It can't seal the case for the prosecution. So these legal protections are already available. When you look at international obligations as well, the UN Charter contains within it the right of prisoners to be treated with dignity. It paves the way for the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, to which India is a signatory, to guarantee basic rights against custodial torture and pressure. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights. India is a party to this as well. Of 1948, India is a signatory to it. It protects individual human rights from any form of torture, including forced disappearance, and guarantees a right to dignity and security. Then we also have a dedicated UN Convention Against Torture brought out in 1984. But can you find out what is India's status with the UN Convention Against Torture? That's a small homework for you. Has India signed this convention? Have we ratified it? Or what? Let me know the status of India with regard to the UN Convention Against Torture. So there are these international commitments as well. And India does have some of these obligations on it. So in this context, the Sattankulam verdict becomes a landmark case. It basically provides a sense of justice to the victims. Those innocent civilian lives can never be brought back. The harm, the damage caused to the families can never be repaired. But at least it brings a sense of closure for those families and delivers justice to the victims. It makes an example out of these rogue police officers who resort to such torture and custodial killings. So, in that regard, this particular verdict must be appreciated. And the investigation of the CBI also played a critical role. But however, there is one problem with the judgment. The Madurai court has applied the uniform proportionality doctrine, where all the 9 accused are treated uniformly, as though they equally participated in the custodial torture and killing of these two individuals. So it has delivered the death punishment for all 9 of them. But historical precedents laid down by Supreme Court and High Courts clearly shows that uniform proportionality will be struck down. If you look at the Rajiv Gandhi assassination case, though the trial and sessions court had given death penalty for all the convicts, eventually the Supreme Court upheld the death punishment only for 4 out of the 26 convicts, because it has to be determined as to what was the gravity of the offense committed by each accused and to what extent each individual was involved in committing that act of violence. And punishment is delivered proportionately to that. Any punishment should be commensurate, it should be matching with the extent of violence that was caused by each individual. So, right now, giving death penalty for all 9 of them may not be the right way forward, though the Madurai court has delivered the verdict. Once it goes on appeal, it's likely to be struck down. But however, the ones who are really responsible, maybe 3 or 4 of them, they will definitely get death penalty, but the others might get a severe form of punishment. So except for that one judicial discrepancy here, the uniform proportionality which has been applied, this verdict can become an example to push the government towards ensuring police reforms in the country. The central and state governments both have the responsibility to reform our police forces, to sensitize them, to raise empathetic police forces. So that is what we learn from this important article. Now we come towards the smaller articles in today's paper. Let's quickly go through them. On the front page, there's an article referring to large protests in Odisha against a proposed mining project. In Sijimali, which is a tribal heartland, a well-known mining firm, Vedanta Group, has entered into a mining project with the Odisha state government. In Sijimali, large bauxite deposits are found to the tune of 301 million tons of bauxite. And as you know, bauxite is a precious mineral, it has wide industrial applications. And the mining of bauxite can become an environmental hazard. It can result in pollution of the soil and the water. It can result in destruction of the forests. It can affect the livelihood and the health of the tribal communities and the local population. So the tribals have rose up in rebellion against this project. They have even accused the state government and Vedanta of being in a corrupt collusion, a corrupt nexus, because they have pointed out that the forest clearance that Vedanta has obtained for the project consists of the name of the same government official present across multiple Gram Sabhas on the same day. Because see, if you have read about Forest Rights Act of 2006, you would know that for any such large scale projects involving forest dwelling communities such as tribal communities, the Gram Sabhas play the decision making role. Gram Sabhas will take a call. They have to essentially vote on such projects, granting clearance and approval for such projects. Gram Sabhas have that right over forest land and tribal rights. So, this project spanning across multiple Gram Sabhas required approvals from different Gram Sabhas and the local bodies. When you look at the document, the clearance that has been given, the same government official is present in all the Gram Sabhas almost at the same time. How is it practically possible or physically possible? So that points towards a derailment of the process, a possible corrupt nexus. Based on these allegations, the tribal communities in the Sijimali region have been protesting, and the protests have been met with police action, resulting in several injuries. Now, this is a case that reminds me of another similar incident in Odisha with regard to Niyamgiri Hills involving the same company, Vedanta Group. The Niyamgiri Hills is also rich in bauxite, located in the same nearby region, and it's home to the Dongriya Kond, which is recognized as a particularly vulnerable tribal group, a PVTG. So Vedanta was looking to mine Yamgiri Hills for bauxite by working with the Odisha state government, but the project generated a lot of opposition by the Dongriya Kond because they worship the Niyamgiri ranges. They believe that the Niyam Raja, the god that they worship, resides in these hills. And as you know, tribal communities, right, they have a very distinct form of faith and spirituality. They worship their nature, the forests, the animals, the mountains, and the rivers, which is sacred to them. Because it's a symbiotic relationship between them, between nature and the tribes. The tribes depend on the forests for their livelihood, for their sustenance, for settling down inside forest areas, for collecting minor forest produce, for basic subsistence agriculture in forested areas. And in turn, they protect and conserve the forest. They don't destroy and overexploit the forest resources. They know their livelihood is dependent on it. So across the world, you see that tribal communities, they inherently protect the nature and forest around them. So there is a very special sacred bond that exists between them. So when a project like the bauxite project at Niyamgiri threatened this relationship, the Dongriya Kond, with the help of legal and human rights activists, they approached the Supreme Court in a landmark case. In 2013, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the Dongriya Kond tribe, protecting the forest rights guaranteed under the Forest Rights Act, recognizing that the Gram Sabhas should be the deciding authority. So the Gram Sabhas rejected the project, leading to the stoppage of this mining project. So this is an issue which has long affected tribal belts in India, not just in Odisha, across central, northeastern part of India, Western Ghats region as well. Such large public projects, mining projects, they have been at the center of controversy with regard to tribal rights and the rights of the local communities. In fact, the resentment surrounding some of such projects also became a root cause for anger amongst the tribals and farmers in some of the remote areas, which was later exploited by the Maoists to drive the Naxal movement across central and eastern parts of India. So, this is an issue relevant for social issues, social justice, and as well as for economy. So, just be aware of this example. the Sijimali bauxite mining project, which is being opposed by the local tribes. Next, on page 9, the Hindu has published a very insightful infographic and data pointer. It is based on data from National Family Health Survey. Data from National Family Health Survey, and Niti Aayog brings out this sustainability index, or the SDI report for India, a state-wise measurement of performance of state governments with regard to key SDI goals and targets. So by using the data from the Niti Aayog's report and from the National Family Health Survey, this infographic is trying to help us understand as to how Indian states are performing with regard to key developmental indicators such as education, healthcare, standard of living, which is mainly based on per capita income. So, using the National Family Health Survey data and the Niti Aayog SDG India Index, this report has been prepared. Now, when you look at Human Development Index, which is used by the UN Development Program, developed by Mehboob ul Haq, a well known Pakistani economist, and Amartya Sen from India, which later found its way into the UNDP assessment. It mainly uses three parameters. One is education, healthcare, and standard of living. Standard of living measured mainly through purchasing power parity based on per capita income. Health primarily measured through um, life expectancy at birth, which depends on maternal mortality rate, infant mortality rates. Education measured through number of enrollment of children in schools, the mean years of learning. These parameters are measured. So when you look at HDI performance, Kerala ranks at the second position out of 29 states, with Goa at the top, Kerala and Delhi forming the next two in the top three. Now, this infographic shows how Kerala outperforms most of the states in most of these indicators and parameters. See, Goa being a smaller state, it's quite understandable as to how Kerala's performance is quite incredible, right? Given the fact that Goa is much smaller, Kerala stands out with its second rank with a HDI of 0.86, which is significantly higher than India's average of 0.73. When you look at per capita net domestic product, Kerala has a much higher per capita net domestic product of more than 3 lakh rupees compared to the national average of 2 lakhs. This places Kerala at seventh position out of 23 states, with Delhi at the top, followed by Telangana, Karnataka. Then, if you look at daily wages, especially in rural areas, here Kerala ranks at the top, followed by Tamil Nadu and Himachal Pradesh. Now, when you specifically look at health related indicators, Kerala ranks number one in these three indicators, which is share of women aged 15-19 who have begun childbearing. Kerala has the one of the best performance in this regard, with regard to infant mortality rate as well. Then even maternal mortality rate. Kerala's MMR is just 19 compared to the national average of 97. So this shows significant progress in Kerala's public health care, focused on maternal health care, infant health care, focused on better nutrition, better diagnosis, then very effective treatment from early on, delivered through primary healthcare centers. This has been the successful governance model, the healthcare model that Kerala has built. It ranks at second position on other indicators like sanitation, children with stunted growth, etc. So overall, compared to other states, Kerala outperforms states in most of the indicators. With regard to education as well, Kerala ranks number one with regard to share of women who have done no schooling, meaning it has the least illiteracy rate compared to any other state, followed by Mizoram and Goa, displaying their high literacy levels. And if you look at the share of men who have no schooling, here as well, Kerala is at the top, meaning it has very high literacy rates. Very few men and women in the state are out of the schooling system. The dropout rates as well, states like Manipur, Himachal Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, and Kerala also at the sixth position, they perform the best. with regard to enrollment rate, gross enrollment, and gender parity, right? Especially gender parity in education is again a key indicator, which highlights the gender divide. Kerala is at the top with the least gender gap, followed by Himachal Pradesh and Nagaland. Now, when you look at environmental and infrastructure indicators, even here Kerala generally performs well. With regard to number of households living in kacha houses, Kerala is at the top position. And even on other indicators, with regard to plastic pollution, Kerala performs poorly. It's at the 10th position, highlighting the significant plastic pollution problem in states like Kerala, right? Even fuel consumption, it stands at 9. But internet penetration stands out with Kerala at the second position. So, how does Kerala outperform states in so many indicators compared to other states? Of course, there are areas where Kerala is falling behind, like plastic pollution, for example, in some indicators of health and education as well. There are other states like Goa, some in some cases Himachal Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, or northeastern states which perform better. But this again helps you understand the role of governance, the importance of good governance and efficient administration to implement welfare schemes, socio-economic programs that can bring about these outcomes in learning, in healthcare, in quality of life and standard of living. So this data, I think you can use it in your mains answers to justify your argument. Or you can throw this in as an example. Or maybe there could be prelims questions based on it. Now, coming to the last topic for today, on page 16, we have this article, according to which India's share of oil imports had hit a peak of 91% in the month of February 2026. That is just before the Iran war broke out. India had increased its import dependency, importing 91% of its oil requirement. Now, this was quite abnormal. See, generally, India's oil import dependency is in the range of 85%. It has even gone down to as low as 80 to 81%. So, how come there was a sudden jump in India's oil dependency and import dependency? This was primarily because of the American pressure on India to stop Russian oil imports. As India fell under American pressure caused by the tariff policy of Trump, India started cutting back on Russian oil imports. Last year, Russia accounted for nearly 38 to 40% of overall imports in the Indian oil basket. India has gradually reduced this to just around 26% by the start of this year. So, this reduction in buying of cheap discounted Russian oil under American pressure led India to pick up more oil from other sources, especially from West Asian countries, that increased our import dependency, that too on the Persian Gulf and the Hormuz Strait. Not only oil imports jumped to 91% of our total oil requirement, 54% of it was being bought from West Asia in February 2026. See, we had reduced our dependency on West Asian oil coming through Persian Gulf and Hormuz by diversifying towards Russian oil, which was being sold at a discounted price. But because of Trump's pressure on India, India falling under the American pressure, we cut down the imports from Russia and we had shifted towards more West Asian sources from Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Oman, and the others. And this exposed India to a greater vulnerability as the war broke out by the end of Feb. So, in the month of Feb, we had already stepped up our dependency on oil imports, reaching 91% of our total requirement, with 54% of the imports coming from West Asia alone. So, now India is diversifying again, focusing on Russian oil again, but Russia is no longer giving any discounts. This again highlights the importance of maintaining your energy independence and maintaining strategic autonomy in your foreign policy, right? So, this data tells you a lot of things about India's energy policy and foreign policy challenges that we are facing because of US and the conflicts involving Russia, involving the Gulf countries. So just be aware of this data, which could be relevant for your mains and prelims exam. So on this note, I bring the discussion to an end. I hope it was an insightful and interesting class. If you liked it, do press the like button, share your comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.